Winning stuff for the sake of it and going and being overindulgent is part of the fun, actually. If you're coming up with why he drank his cocktails, shaken but not stirred. And actually, my favorite thing in the second book was where his gunmetal cigarette case had come from and what was written inside it. To me, I've left my own little vandalized scratching, my own graffiti inside the Bond cannon. I know what's written inside that gunmetal cigarette case.
Bomb. Bomb. Cannonball!
We want this all day.
Did you rub my lamp?
1,000 generations living here now.
Here we go.
Hey, how's it going, everyone? And welcome to FilmSpeak, where the conversation continues after the credits. If this is our first time meeting, hey, my name is Griffin Schiller. I'm an LA-based entertainment journalist and film critic. And if you want to be a part of that conversation, you're definitely in the right place. Consider subscribing to the channel for more insight, analysis, and interviews behind your favorite movies. And I guess I really should have said behind your favorite film, television, and books in this particular case, because we're talking to one of my favorite authors on the planet right now, someone who's very instrumental in not only my love of literature, but my love of espionage and spycraft, and of course, with his new series, Alex Rider, coming out, it was the perfect time to chat with him. We are talking about Mr. Anthony Horowitz, and I'm not joined here alone. I did conduct this interview in conjunction with my good friend, Brody Saravelli, from the Words Are Not Enough podcast, and as big James Bond fans, we had so many questions we wanted to ask him. Brody, thank you for joining me today, and thank you for coming on to conduct the interview with me. How are you doing?
Yeah, not too bad. I was gonna say it's a little early for me, but it's a lot early for you. So I try not to complain too much.
Yeah, I had to wake up at 5:30 for this one, but listen, it was worth it because the conversation was unbelievable. Anthony Horowitz was an absolute delight. For those of you who are not familiar with him, he is the author behind the Alex Rider series, the Diamond Brothers series. He's written 2 James Bond novels commissioned by the Ian Fleming estate, obviously Trigger Mortis and Forever and a Day, the prequel to Casino Royale. Very risky move, but it ended up paying off because it was a phenomenal novel. And and he's the executive producer on this new Alex Rider series for Amazon Prime. And I got to tell you guys, after blowing through that, I blew through that series in like a day or so. It's amazing. It's everything Alex Rider fans could have hoped for, and then some. And you could tell just from the conversation that we had with him, he's really proud of it.
Yeah, no, it seems like he's glowing. I think we were discussing this when we were doing our research. He's always a very energetic guy when it comes to these interviews, but he was especially enthusiastic just to show off what they had come up with. So yeah, it was great.
Yeah, for sure. So you guys are definitely going to make sure you don't want to miss it. It hits Amazon Prime on November 13th, I believe. So yeah, listen, if you're a Bond fan like us, and No Time to Die has now vacated the month of November, and we're not going to be getting
the year of 2020
until 2021. This is a great filler, man. It's got thrills. There's like obviously a little bit of a Honor Majesty's Secret Service homage towards the beginning. But then also it's just one of those, it's an adaptation that treats the target demographic with respect. And it's something that I feel like has been missing from the young adult genre for some time now. We got a taste of it with Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. This one definitely hits that mark, and hopefully this starts to become a trend, because I think it's a show that the whole family can enjoy, which is something that Mr. Horowitz was definitely very happy about. He wants everyone to engage and watch the series together and all that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it was something he definitely stressed a lot, was that he wanted this to be something that was mature enough that everyone could enjoy it, but still accessible to younger people. Much like the books, really. The books were like, they never really fell in one category or the other. It's definitely like a young adult fiction in its truest sense, I guess. It very much is for people ready to become adults rather than children. So the show definitely lives up to that.
Of course, yeah. And listen, we had to get into Bond in some capacity. I'm still kicking myself because it was just like we were just scratching the surface on Bond before we had to start wrapping it up. But listen, you can tell he's a fan. He is a fan in the truest sense of the word. And I think, just through talking with him, just through research process, listening to past interviews he's done, he loves the character. I mean, he said it multiple times that James Bond actually saved him as a kid. Like going to the theater and watching Sean Connery in Dr. No or reading Fleming's novels, they provided that perfect escapism that he needed just from what was going on in his own life and the brutish boarding school that he was forced to attend as a kid. So it's just always great to just have those genuine conversations with someone who like legitimately loves the property as much as you and I.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I think his enthusiasm, if he was trying to mask it, he wasn't doing a very good job, because he was very, very, very excited when we sort of went there with it. And I think what have I really enjoyed about this conversation is that when it came to the Alex Rider stuff, we were speaking as fans, and then when we get to the Bond stuff, he was speaking as a fan. And there was kind of it was just a big orgy of fandom.
But guys, before we get into this interview, be sure to jump down in the comments section and let us know what your favorite work by Mr. Anthony Horowitz is down in the comments section below. The guy has written so many novels across genres. He's truly one of the most prolific writers of our generation right now, and it was a real pleasure chatting with him. So leave your comments down below, and then let's get into this thing. Here is our conversation with Anthony Horowitz. Anthony, it's great to be chatting with you this morning. Hopefully you're doing well, despite all the madness that's going on in the world right now.
Very, very strange world out there, that's for sure.
Yeah, for sure. Well, it's actually kind of funny, like for me, because last night I was watching a screener for Roald Dahl's the new adaptation of The Witches, and then right before that I had finished Alex Rider, and now obviously speaking with you, and it's sort of like I'm reliving all of these like childhood books in new formats that I just grew up with, and I don't know, it's just something that was really cool to me.
I've got to ask you, how was The Witches? And
it was wild. Yeah, it was totally wild. I thought Anne Hathaway nailed it. She was great as the the head witch and everything like that. So that was a lot of fun. But obviously going back to Alex Rider, one of the things I've always wanted to know is just how much of just some of this the action set pieces and the scenarios in this film were inspired by On Her Majesty's Secret Service, because from the base escape to the compound raid and everything like that, like them going back and forth, it just was screaming Majesties to me, and I'm not sure if that was something that was on your mind while you were writing the book.
Well, all the Alex Rider books were inspired to a certain extent by the James Bond novels, which I absolutely loved growing up, and of course the movies too. I wouldn't say that the escapes in Point Blanc have got anything to do with Ian Fleming, because I always take a great deal of pride in coming up with my own sort of action adventure things. And as far as I know, James Bond never, for example, sawed the legs off an ironing board to turn it into a snowball and go chasing down a mountain. But what is certainly true is that when I wrote that book, I was, a long time ago, and long before this TV series, thinking a little bit about that particular book, because of the snow setting, because of the idea of a clinic somewhere high up in the mountains, somewhere that's cut off from civilization. That seemed to me to be a very interesting sort of area to explore. But then again, a finishing school run by Doctor Greif and the clinic that's in On Her Majesty's Secret Service, very different things.
Yeah, for sure. But I definitely got the gist from the vibe from the snow base and everything like that. But so obviously this is like sort of like the second crack at like an Alex Rider sort of thing. And I was listening to a few interviews of you talking about like your experience on the first Stormbreaker film, and I believe you said something along the lines of like, while you still think there is merit to that film, which I agree, because I grew up like probably that appropriate age enjoying that film. You have like sort of conceded a bit that it didn't quite hit the mark in terms of an adaptation, and that this series is what you always wanted Alex Rider to sort of be. And so, while you weren't as hands-on in this particular adaptation, given, you're the executive producer and everything, I am curious, what lessons you learned from that first film that you brought to the table when they were sort of like talking to you about this series.
Okay, there's quite a lot to unravel in that. The first thing to say is that, yes, I do think that Stormbreaker was in many ways a successful film and very memorable at the time. I mean, the image of Alex hanging off the skyscraper in the middle of London, the famous Gherkin, is absolutely an iconic image of that time. And it had a wonderful cast and lots of good things in it. Where I was a little disappointed with Stormbreaker, and this was an argument I lost at the time, so it wasn't something that I learned later on, was that it wasn't adult enough. It wasn't edgy enough. The violence levels, although I didn't think they should be too extreme, I thought there should always be a real danger that Alex could get hurt. He gets hurt a lot in the books, which I always think of as adult books for kids rather than kids' books. And I wanted that level of threat to be there. And I lost that argument with the producer, who, as you know, was Harvey Weinstein, and he didn't tend to lose any arguments. And we all know what happened to him. But anyway, the TV show, this series with Otto Farrant, is much, much closer to what I really had wanted all those years ago. And I think mainly because it is more grown up. You couldn't do Point Blanc, Alex Rider, for a kid's audience. This is not a kid's show, it is a family show. I'm also well aware that since 20 years have passed, I now have fans who read those books when they were like 12 and 13 years old, and now they're people like yourself. I don't know if you did read me as a kid, but they are people.
Oh, yeah.
And there is a whole adult following, that is to say people in their 20s and 30s, and we had to appeal to them with this TV show. And I think we did do that. We aged up Alex a little bit. Otto is clearly not 14 years old. The action and the levels of intensity are much stronger. There are moments of real violence in this show. I mean, the death of Ian Ryder is quite shocking. And there's a moment where Mrs. Stellenbosch slaps Alex in her office where you have to say, my God, what's going on here? And you step back. And I think they've got that exactly right. It is not a gross out. It is not too horrible for the young kids who might come and watch it, but it is satisfyingly adult and serious enough for a new adult audience.
I completely agree, and actually touches on something that I have sort of long thought about, like sort of the young adult genre and how it was treated in like that early to mid 2000s period, because it kind of felt like for a period there it became really popular, but I feel like a lot of studios were just sort of chasing like Harry Potter. They were like, we got to make Harry Potter again so that we can make that Harry Potter money. And so I think you see a lot of the adaptions of young adult fiction at that time, like Percy Jackson, like Alex Rider. They all sort of try to cater to that same audience, and maybe even if it wasn't appropriate for the material they were adapting. And so is that something that you felt was the case at the time, or?
No, not really. I think it's fair to say that we were already adapting, or certainly I was writing the screenplay of Stormbreaker long before Harry Potter became as huge as it finally did, or certainly at the same time as that sort of enormous growth was coming. And I forget what time the first Harry Potter movie was, but I have a feeling it was a little bit later, a bit further down the line. No, I think you are right to say that the children's films, or the sort of the YA films that were made at that time, and you're correct in pointing out Percy Jackson and the Lemony Snicket was another one, which I think has incidentally also been much better served by a later television adaptation too. Yeah. And Maze Runner to a lesser extent, because they made 3 of that quite successfully. I think they did get the tone wrong, but that was a producer's decision rather than mine or the director's. We had to fight against what the system wanted, and what the system wanted actually was not quite the same, I think, as what the public ultimately wanted at that time.
Yeah, so I wonder, is that one of the reasons why, and I don't know if you find this to be true, but do you think that's why, at least in my opinion, I've always found that some of the entities in the films or the television series or whatever in this genre, they sort of struggle with treating the target audience, the target demographic with respect, and I feel like, obviously kids don't want to be talked down to, and I get the sense that in this particular adaptation, it does hit that mark. It is mature enough. I think it's something where like parents can enjoy. It's something that the kids can enjoy as well, and it feels like they're watching something that's got a little bit of an edge to it. And I felt that way when I saw the latest Scary Stories adaptation. I was like, what? That's a film that really nails its target demographic, and it gives the audience something, that feels a little bit more mature to them.
Well, I think you have to remember also, Griffin, now that the audience has changed because of television. You know, if a show is on IMDb or Netflix or wherever, it is now the family and the children to a large extent who are choosing for themselves the material that they're going to go and see. There's no certification. There may be warnings on the screen, but there are no rules. So going to the movie theater and watching a show in your own home are two very different experiences. And I think we've benefited from that because we've been able to say, look, here is a show that everybody can come together in the living room and watch. And, you know, it's not like with Stormbreaker where, you know, was this the drop-off audience? I always remember Harvey Weinstein talking about the drop-off audience, the parents who drop their kids off versus the ones who take their children to the show and therefore buy more tickets. So he wanted 6-year-olds to watch it with their big brothers, and that was never going to work because big brothers do not want to go to a movie theater with their 6-year-old kid brothers or sisters, whatever it's going to be. So I think that having the freedom of choice that television provides has really played in our favor. And again, what is so great is that, you know, we have got the demographic exactly right. Not too scary for the little kids, but certainly edgy enough and adult enough for their big brothers, big sisters, and parents.
So I was actually going to pivot slightly more towards Point Blanc specifically, because you mentioned in the beginning, like so much of the story is sort of set in this, you know, in this boarding school, and that was kind of we were doing some research prior to this interview, and you mentioned that you had attended a boarding school when you were a kid, and I was just sort of wondering what it was about the culture of a boarding school that in your brain said this would be a great place to set like a spy thriller.
Well, if you'd gone to the boarding school I was sent to when I was 8 years old, you'd know what evil is all about. I mean, the teachers, the atmosphere there was horrendous. And I mean, I think I had a worse time at my boarding school than poor Alex does at Point Blanc. It's important to say that Point Blanc Academy is not exactly a boarding school. It is more akin to the finishing school. And a finishing school is a really interesting idea that you send your children away to improve them broadly in their attitudes and in the way they react to you and their relationships, their emotional life, rather than to learn science, history, physics, or whatever. And I think that's really interesting. But I also remember that when I wrote up Point Blanc, the book that is, all those years ago, I was struck by the fact that wealthy parents send their kids to these schools, finishing schools, boarding schools, to change them because they're not perfect the way they are. And I thought, wouldn't it be interesting if a school changes them so completely that they are actually different people now, and the parents are going to be pleased. Great, my kid is exactly the way I wanted him to be. So I think underneath the story of Point Blanc, you know, underneath the sort of the science fiction side of it and the fantasy side of it, there is an essential truth, which is that children who are sent away to these expensive clues do feel undervalued and do feel resentful, but their parents cannot accept them for what they are. That was certainly true for me.
Yeah, wow. And that definitely comes across in the story. And I think another element of it that I didn't fully appreciate as a kid, but I am appreciating now as an adult, like revisiting it, is there is kind of like this, and this might be me reading far too into it, but there is this element of almost like, because you have like Dr. Greif, and he sort of represents this resistance to decolonization almost. And then I guess as a child, not as a child, but as an adult, have sort of viewed a lot of these finishing schools, a lot of these boarding schools as kind of an institution of that system that sort of, you know, you have to conform, you have to fall in line with a certain way of thinking, you know, like the empire and all this stuff. And he sort of represents like the system fighting back and saying, we're going to institutionalize quite literally, you know, belief in this system. I don't know. That's just something I didn't fully appreciate as a kid.
Really, I'm very happy to hear you say this, because the truth of the matter is that the Alex Rider books are fantasies, they're entertainments, they are just fast reads, and they are, you know, they're meant to provide pleasure to a young audience and escapism, and boy, are they needed right now. Yeah. But at the same time, I've always laced in deeper ideas, stronger ideas, ideas about politics, about life, about the environment, about attitudes, about what it's like to be young in the 21st century or the end of the 20th century when I was writing then. You know, it is there inside it. I mean, you know, Guy Burt, I think very wisely made Greif a much more earthed character. In the book, he's called Doctor Greif. In the series, he's become Doctor Greif. Greif is a perfectly good South African name. In the book, he's slightly more cartoonish, and I remember that he's got this very strong. He's an apartheid. I mean, he supports apartheid, and I even made him. I remember an albino. He's so he has no color at all. And that was fine for the book and fine for that time when I wrote it. But again, I think Guy was very wise to make him more serious. But at the same time, some of the overtones of what I was writing have definitely crept in there, and I'm very happy you saw them.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah, for sure. I guess sort of like pivoting away from Alex Rider a little bit, we do want to touch on Bond. I mean, obviously we're massive Bond fans and whatnot, and so we'd be remiss if we didn't chat about it with you, obviously being the writer of 2 of the Bond novels yourself. And there was something interesting that when Brody and I were sort of preparing for this, we were talking about it. Cubby Broccoli always said that Bond films are set like 5 minutes in the future, and it's something that's always separated this series from Jason Bourne or like Jack Reacher or other sort of like espionage adventures. And so like the slightly heightened reality of the Bond franchise is something you've managed to incorporate not only in your novels, but in Alex Rider as well. And it's such a fine line to ride. And I'm curious how you're able to find that balance. Is it really just a conscious thing that you're thinking about, or is it more instinct?
Well, Griffin, first of all, let me say that the moment you came on the screen, I was admiring your Dr. No there on the right. That I love that movie so much, and No Time to Die over there as well. And Pierce Brosnan, I think I can see there.
Yeah.
It is. It's great to talk to a fellow Bond fan. And Bond has been a huge inspiration to me. In terms of the reality level, I've always tried to make the Alex Rider books have a little bit of that tongue-in-cheek that you get in some of the Bond movies without ever going too great extremes. So, for example, I have never created a gadget in any of the books that wouldn't possibly work. And the science behind every single one of the stories I've written exists. If you look at Scorpio, which goes quite deeply into nanotechnology, or Archangel, which takes Alex Rider into outer space, I spent enormous amounts of time researching and didn't write anything that wasn't vaguely possible. And it's extraordinary how I would be able to come up with ideas which sounded crazy when I thought of them. And then I'd go to the experts and say, well, what about this idea? And they'd begin by saying, no, that can't happen. And they'd say, well, actually, wait a moment. If it was this and that, and you changed that, and you did this, then that would work. Well, that's interesting. And I remember even when I was talking to nanotechnology scientists, they were saying that the whole field was so terrifying, I shouldn't write about it at all because they're so scared about the potential of nanotechnological weapons. But that, I think, answers your question. It's research, and it's also always making sure. I'll give you an example. There's only one gadget in all the Bond movies which I didn't like, and that was the invisible car. The invisible car, it was brutally great fun. I love the movie, incidentally, but I've just always thought to myself, if you've got an invisible car, you've sort of stepped from Bond into Harry Potter. And is what I try to avoid doing.
I'm curious, what are your thoughts on because we get a little bit of it in this Alex Rider series, but what are your thoughts on like the gene therapy and whatnot? What Purvis and Wade were trying to do in Die Another Day. There are rumors that they're trying to do that in No Time to Die and whatnot, and then obviously in this Alex Rider series, the first season of it, we get a little bit of that in like the cloning and whatnot.
And I'm not entirely current with what you're talking about. The gene, what did you say it was? Gene?
Just like, tampering with genetics in order to like, I guess, create like a modern, espionage. Agents going undercover by disguising themselves through like gene therapy and stuff like that.
I think the whole idea of genes and the whole genome and the whole idea of tampering with the very stuff of human existence is fascinating. And when you read about all the stuff, I mean, the Alex Rider Crocodile Tears goes into genetics and GM crops as the story of that one. And it's a brilliant area because I think that for movies like Bond or for franchises like Alex Rider, the most interesting science is the one that's right on the edge there, the sort of the way you get the conspiracy theorists, where you get people arguing. I mean, to be honest with you, you look at the anti-vacciners who are turning up at this moment, and they have this terror that science is producing something which is supposed to help us, but actually it's all a lie, and they're going to inject us with something that's going to change our genes and turn it into something else. So that, I think, is what you're talking about. And I think that little gray area between reality and the sort of the future is exactly where I want to be.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess with your Bond novel specifically, something that I am very curious about is, I guess when you were writing Trigger Mortis, you kind of had the luxury of inserting it within, the Fleming chronology. So you had sort of his Bond to work with and to inform your depiction of him in the story. But then when you get to Forever and a Day, you're pretty much writing a book that precedes all of Fleming's novels. And so how do you go about approaching the character so that it doesn't feel like you're just, explaining everything for the sake of itself, or, overindulging your fan in you?
Explaining stuff for the sake of it and being overindulgent is part of the fun, actually. If you're coming up with why he drank his cocktails shaken but not stirred. And actually, my favorite thing in the second book was where his gunmetal cigarette case had come from and what was written inside it. To me, I've left my own little vandalized scratching, my own graffiti inside the Bond canon. I know written inside that gunmetal cigarette case. But the thing for me mainly is that I love Bond as a character. I love him in the films. I love him even more in the books. And I've always said that, as far as I'm concerned, this is without wanting to criticize any of the other Bond writers who've done great work, Bond exists within a certain time zone. You have to understand his life. You have to understand the dates of his life from the 50s through to the end of the 60s, plus, of course, the Second World War and his work in intelligence and all that stuff. And if you take him out of that, you lose something. Now, one of the great geniuses of the Bond movies is that they somehow have managed to move Bond into the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, and now into the 2020s. And every single time they do it, they reinvent themselves. Look at a Roger Moore movie of Bond, and look at some of the gags in it, some of the sexist jokes he makes, and some of the sort of the attitude to women, and some of the sort of tongue-in-cheek humor. And it may make you wince now, but believe me, at the time, we loved it. And those movies still hold up, even if they do feel a little bit more period now. So the genius of it is the films can manage to move Bond into the 21st century. I don't think the books can or should.
Gotcha.
Yep, I completely agree with that.
Yeah, for sure. Well, unfortunately, we are out of time. We have so many more questions that we wish we could get to, but unfortunately, we do have to wrap up. But Anthony, thank you so much for your time. It's been a real pleasure chatting with you. Massive fan of Magpie Murders. I'm looking forward to reading Moonflower Murders and your Bond novels, all your work. It's a real pleasure for me to chat with you.
Thank you so much. And if I can say, this is my first interview of the day, and if they're all as pleasant as this one, I'm going to have a nice time. So thank you.
Well, fantastic. I'm glad we were able to leave an good impression. But yeah, great. Cheers. Thanks again. Well, there you have it, guys. That was our conversation with Anthony Horowitz. Truly a delight, a pleasure. I want to chat with him again, man. I'm telling you. Right? You could probably sense it towards the end that we just had so much more that we wanted to get to, but weren't able to. But we were grateful for the amount of time that we had with him, and it was a blast.
Yeah, no, Anthony, give us a call. You've got our Zoom now. Just hit us up whenever, man.
For sure. Guys, again, we want to know what your favorite Anthony Horowitz book is down in the comments section below. And then also, if you haven't done so already, be sure to like this video, share with your friends, and subscribe to the FilmSpeak channel so you don't miss out on more interviews such as this, movie reviews, other entertainment coverage. We like to say the conversation continues after the credits. And sometimes we're fortunate enough to have those conversations with the people directly involved in their creation. So definitely stick around for more of that goodness. And be sure to check out Alex Rider on Amazon Prime on November 13th. You seriously do not want to miss this. It's great. It's really good. I know it premiered over in the UK, so some of you UK fans already are like, I've seen the whole thing. It's phenomenal. Brag a little bit more. Why don't you? No, it's really, if you're a fan of Alex Rider and those books, this is going to deliver on everything that you wanted out of that. So be sure to check that out. Don't sleep on it. Brody, thank you so much for joining me on this interview. Hopefully we can schedule a follow-up or something in the future.
Yeah, maybe.
But in the meantime, where can everyone find you?
So people can follow me on Twitter at Brody Ceravelli, or we keep saying we're going to revive this thing. You can follow us at Twain Pod. Eventually, I swear to God, we'll get back on there. And that's our James Bond podcast feed. So you can just listen to us talk about James Bond stuff.
after the election, we'll get back on there.
There we go. Yeah, that's a good excuse.
That's the promise. Which, go vote. That's
Yeah,
not a joke.
seriously.
Go
If you
vote,
don't go
please.
we
Use
won't
your.
bring it back.
Yeah, right. If you don't vote, we won't bring it back. Exercise your freedom and your privilege as an American. Anyways, guys, be sure to like FilmSpeak on Facebook. Follow us on Twitter. Just search FilmSpeak. And if you like me specifically and you like what I have to say, you can give me a follow on Twitter at Griff Schiller. All right, guys. Thank you so much for tuning into this interview with Anthony Horowitz, and we will catch you next time. Take care.